Okay, so since we're going through the anatomy of the larynx, this is a good time for you guys to start thinking about how you're going to construct your model of your larynx as the final project at the end of this class. So here are some examples. I'm going to go through them with you. One thing I want to say is students ask me they're worried about how perfect or how beautiful their models are, and I don't grade them on how beautiful they are. I don't grade them on their correctness to scale. So the scale doesn't matter. Some people hand them in and they're a foot high, and some people hand them in and they're teeny tiny, and that's fine. Some people make theirs out of clay. I had one year everyone made theirs out of clay, and all of them looked like coffee mugs, but they were still basically correct, so that was fine. I had one year where a lot of students made them out of candy, different kinds of candy, so they were entirely edible. And that was interesting as well. All right, but how these are going to be graded is basically the laryngeal cartilages need to be correct in relation to each other. And the main thing is if your cartilages aren't correct in their relation to each other, then there's no way your muscles are going to be correct in relation to each other. And there's a lot of muscles that you're going to be graded on. So if your muscles are all wrong because your cartilages are all wrong, then you're going to be in the realm of a very bad grade. So looking at this larynx, here we have the cricoid, here we have the thyroid, and the epiglottis. And if I turn it sideways, you can see that the inferior cornu of the thyroid comes down and articulates with the cricoid cartilage just as it would. So that's a very elegant presentation there. And then you have these yellow arytenoids that are sitting on the back top of the cricoid cartilage. And then you see that once the student had, so there's the arytenoids. Once the student had all the cartilages in place, then she was able to start gluing on pieces of ribbon or paper to represent the muscles. I'll show you this one before we get into the muscles. So once again, cricoid cartilage, thyroid cartilage, and the epiglottis is glued on up here. And you can see this laterally. Posteriorly, you can see that the arytenoids here she made out of looks like purple paper and glued them on the posterior surface of the cricoid cartilage. So that's exactly where they need to be. And so once all the cartilages are in the right place, then you can put the muscles in the right place. So here you have represented the cricothyroid muscle, and it runs between the cricoid and the thyroid. So one of the things I'm going to be grading you guys for is your muscles need to be, they don't have to be in the exact correct place, but they have to be connected to the correct cartilages in basically a correct fashion. So the cricothyroid muscle, it has to run. I have to see it connected to the cricoid, and I have to see it connected to the thyroid. And that is done here. Looking at this image, looking at this larynx, you see this little black thing here, these two black things, that is her cricothyroid muscle. It attaches, I can see it, it's attached to the cricoid and it's attached to the thyroid. Looking at this one here, the cricothyroid is represented by this little green spot, and I can see that it is attached to the cricoid and the thyroid. For the posterior cricoarytenoid, so here looking at this brown muscle, I need to see that it is attached to the cricoid, and I need to see that it is attached to the muscular process of the arytenoids. Your interarytenoid muscles, transverse and oblique. So notice that you have the arytenoids glued on top of the cricoid, and the transverse and oblique muscles are running between the arytenoids. A common mistake that students make is they'll take the transverse and oblique interarytenoids, and they'll glue them on top down here, and that makes no sense. So you shouldn't see the backs of the arytenoids from the posterior view of the larynx. Here you see the posterior cricoarytenoid. So I can look and I can see that this muscle runs from the cricoid cartilage up to the vocal process of her arytenoid. And you can see the interarytenoids slung between the arytenoid cartilages. And looking at the vocal folds, you can see that the vocal folds run from the posterior surface of the thyroid cartilage down to the vocal processes of the arytenoids. You can see how the student modeled that here. You can see how this student modeled that here. And some students will choose to illustrate the thyrovocalis and the thyromuscularis. I don't think I require you to do that, but some students choose to do that anyway. And this is quite an elegant model here in that fashion, because you can see the thyrovocalis, this dark band. You can see that it inserts into the vocal process, and then you can see the thyromuscularis coming down to insert into the muscular process. So this is a really good illustration of the vocal folds for that fashion. The hardest muscle to illustrate on your model, at least in my experience, is the lateral cricoarytenoid. And that is because, so if we look at this model here, so this blue ribbon right here, that is the lateral cricoarytenoid. It runs from the superior anterior surface of the cricoid behind the inferior cornu of the thyroid to insert into the vocal process of the arytenoids. So looking down at it, you can see how the lateral cricoarytenoid looks like that. And so you can sort of see it beginning here and how it courses up to the muscular process right there. Looking at how this student illustrated it, she's used this brown ribbon. So you can see the brown ribbon reaching up to insert into the muscular process. And then you can see it coming down, originating right there on the superior anterior surface of the cricoid cartilage.